Hey everyone, we're looking at the last conditions for static equilibrium here, and we're talking about whether an equilibrium is stable, unstable, or neutral. So there are three different versions, and this is the picture the book gives you. It gives you the cone with its base, wide base down on the ground as a stable equilibrium, thinking if you tip that cone one way or the other, it's going to try and rotate and torque itself back down to a lower equilibrium. The inverted cone has a center of gravity that's much higher and a much smaller base, so that would be an unstable equilibrium. And if you lay it on the ground and roll it around, that's a neutral equilibrium. So there are three ways of writing out the definitions of the different equilibriums. In stable equilibriums, any displacements create torques that try and bring you back towards that equilibrium. This is very similar to what we talked about with energy and forces. In a stable equilibrium with energy and forces, any increase in the object's potential energy, the object would try to reduce its potential energy as quickly as possible. So that's why we talked about the marbles rolling in a bowl being stable equilibrium. If it's unstable equilibrium, the object will tend to rotate away from the high potential energy it has to a lower potential energy. So again, the cone inverted, the center of gravity is very high, so it has more potential energy than it wants, and it's going to try and rotate and torque itself down to lower state. And the neutral equilibrium is like moving something on a table. Any torques on the objects in a neutral equilibrium, no torques are on the object, and they can rotate in either direction, so there's no change in the gravitational energy. So those are the three you want to kind of focus on. And we did lots of demonstrations with, or lots of types of different stabilities. The stabilities we talked about were making sure that your center of gravity was nice and low, and that your center of gravity stays over your base. As long as those two conditions are met, objects will tend to remain in their nice stable equilibrium. So for things like this, as you tip the book, it's stable until the force of gravity goes across the base. When it goes across the base, it now becomes unstable and wants to torque itself down to the ground to reduce its potential energy. So more stable things, like you can see here, more of the weight is at the bottom versus the top. And just like these little weebles, remember the weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. So like we talked about in all the different demonstrations we did with trying to pick things up or stand next to the wall and move around or stand straight up out of your chair without leaning forward, it all depends on where your center of gravity is and where the base is. So even things like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, the force of gravity at the center of the Leaning Tower is pulling right down here, which you can see is still right across its base. So even though the tower is tipping, it is in a stable equilibrium because the force is sitting right on top of its base. The weird stacks of books that you can do, or balancing the two forks with a toothpick, the center of gravity of the whole system is right below that balance point. So even though the book, that last book, is completely off the desk, if you look at the center of gravity of each setup, or the whole system here, the force of gravity is pointing straight down on the end of the table. So all the table has to do is push back up at the center of gravity and balance whatever combination of things you can think of above it. There's your last little bit for stable equilibrium. I'll leave you with a video from Minute Physics here that discusses how to balance pencils and why it's so difficult to balance a pencil. So good luck on your homework, and we'll see you next time.